Hi, I'm Walt Rubel, editorial page editor for the Las Cruces Sun News. With me today are Frank Leto, the publisher, and Sylvia Ulloa, the managing editor. And we're talking today with the candidates in the race for City Council in District 2. District 2 is in the southern part of Las Cruces. It surrounds the NMSU campus. And we have two candidates running this year. And this is a little bit of a unique race this year in Las Cruces, in that there are 3 city council races, but this is the only one in which we have an incumbent running for re-election. In District 1, Miguel Silva has elected to run for mayor instead. And in District 4, Nathan Small is giving up his seat. So we know for certain that we'll have 2 new city council members in those districts. In District 1, we're talking today with Greg Smith, the incumbent, and Philip VanVeen, a local businessman who is running as the challenger this year. And Greg, normally I like to start with the incumbents, and so this is the first opportunity we've had to do that this time around. Like to ask you real brief introduction, because I think most voters know who you are by now. And also just ask you about your term on the city council. What accomplishments are you most proud of? And are there issues that you've started that you want to see through to completion?
Well, thank you, Walt. I'm a firm believer in being a lifelong learner. As a former teacher, I continue to stress that, both in talking with former students and people about education, but also in this position. So the last 4 years have definitely been included a lot of learning, and that includes how the city charter works. It includes how the interactions between the city council and the staff, how city council works with the public. And I would say that in that process, I feel like I've learned fairly quickly, but also that in that process there are ongoing nuances to how the job gets done and what you can do. As far as what I'm most proud of, there are a number of things. One, I started something called the non-quorum caucus. And basically, as city council members, there are 7 of us, and we cannot meet 4 of us without putting out a public notice. So I've gotten together with 2 other councilors, and we have then a non-quorum. 3 of us don't make a quorum. We have a caucus, and we then discuss, because there's a fairly equal representation across the board of what the different people look at, and we then talk about some of the issues that are coming before us, and in that way we get a gauge on how we might approach that, not so that we can always be unanimous, but so that we can at least get a sense for what's going to work for us. So that's one thing I'm very proud of. I'm also proud of moving forward our historic preservation ordinance, our public art ordinance, certainly conversation about the aquatic center, and other things along those lines, and communication with constituents. I have had weekly meetings on Tuesdays and Wednesdays each week with constituents where, some weeks nobody shows up, other weeks several people show up, but they know that I'm going to be at Milagro Coffee Espresso on Tuesdays at 9 and Spirit Winds on Wednesdays at 7:30. That, along with the communication through the normal channels, has allowed me to have a lot of really good communication with my constituents. Other things are more on the broad base, certainly getting the plaza moving forward. That was something that I felt like I took a very strong role on, and basically we were looking at the location where the plaza is going, and we kept saying, well, that's the only place it can be, that's the only place it can be. And I said, if we keep saying that and it's owned by a private entity, their willingness to negotiate with us is hampered. And so I started seriously talking about other locations where the plaza could conceivably be, so that we could get it going. And that seems to have helped get the ball rolling on that, so that we did end up being able to negotiate, being able to get the plaza in the most ideal location. Right. So that's something I really do take a great deal of pride in.
Okay.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah, you bet. Mr. VanVeen, we know a little bit about you. We know that you own a security company, that you're involved in the local Lions Club. What are some other things that the voters need to know about you? And also, I'd like to ask you, are there 1 or 2 issues that why are you running for city council? What motivated you to get in the race? And are there one or two issues that you really want to tackle if you get into this job.
Sure. Let's start with the Lions Club. Just for clarification on that, there's 5 Lions Clubs in Las Cruces, and a lot of people don't realize that.
Right.
But there's a number of them. The one I'm the president of the Las Cruces Host Lions Club, which is the oldest Lions Club in the area. It's been here a long time, a lot longer than I've been alive. So it's an old club, and we do a lot of great things for the community. I'm also involved with the Southern New Mexico Diabetes Outreach. In fact, we have a board meeting tonight that I need to attend. But the Diabetes Outreach does a lot of good in our community as well in educating people on diabetes and doing things like they'll set up for free at a lot of places and test people to let them know where their blood sugar's at and what's going on with their bodies in that respect and helping in those areas. Some of the things I'd like to do in the community, different than what's being done now. I'm a roll your sleeves up kind of guy. Being a local businessman and being in business for 30 years, that's kind of my MO and where I go with things. And I would like to see us get a little bit more back to being our city council being more involved with our community. Not just being at City Hall and people can make an appointment and come see us every now and then or meet us somewhere. But I'd like to see our city councils, quite honestly, back on the streets. I'd like to see our city councilors back in the neighborhoods. When a neighborhood issue is going on in a neighborhood, I don't think we need to sit in City Hall. And you see that sometimes when you're watching not only City Council, but I was in a planning and zoning meeting recently watching and noticed that the people on the council didn't understand exactly what was going on in that area because they hadn't taken the time to go look at it. So I'm a firm believer, an issue comes up, let's go look at it, let's knock on some doors and talk to some neighbors in the area and say, what's going on? Because the bottom line is at the end of the day, that neighborhood is their neighborhood, it's not my neighborhood. And I need to do what's right for them. And in order to do that, we need to know what they're saying, what they're doing.
I wanted to start with something that I think is, we hear all the time that there are too many regulations and that the city council isn't business friendly enough. Mm-hmm. And it occurs to me that there's one issue that they've tackled recently that is sort of right down your alley. Mm-hmm. And that is the issue of false alarms, what to do with the problem. Police were telling the city council that they were spending far too much time responding to these, and so the council did come up with an ordinance where now owners have to register them, and Greg, correct me on the details, but my recollection is that if you have more than 3 or something, you might be subject to a fine.
Correct.
As a business owner who has had to sort of deal with that particular ordinance, I assume that you sort of watched that process as it unfolded, and what did you think about all of that?
We didn't just watch that process, we got involved in that process, and in fact, we're one of the companies that was pushing for that.
Okay.
Las Cruces had a big problem with what I like to refer to as door knocking companies that come into Las Cruces, door to door selling alarm systems, skating around, and it still happens by the way, skating around a lot of the ordinances and stuff that goes on, having unlicensed personnel install alarm systems, and managing to get away with it. An ordinance is a good way to make sure that the people installing the alarm systems are licensed, and it's a good way to put a finger on the alarm companies themselves, like my company, to make sure we're doing what we're supposed to. I'm not opposed to regulation, I'm opposed to bad regulation. The ordinance that the City Council adopted was not the one that I supported. In fact, the one that I recommended to the City Council is an ordinance that keeps us from creating the bureaucracy that we created in the existing ordinance. So my idea behind that ordinance initially was to design an ordinance that fines the alarm companies, not the end users, for the false alarms. And by doing that, you put the alarm companies in the loop. So an alarm company that doesn't want to take responsibility for what they do isn't going to do business in Las Cruces because they don't want to be in that position where they're put under a microscope. It helps the alarm company because, quite frankly, if any of you on the panel, if your alarm system activated and it had a repeat false alarm problem and I happen to be your alarm company, you can better believe that I'm going to get on top of it because that fine's coming to me. Now, I may pass it on to you in your billing if it's your fault, but I already have that mechanism set up. We didn't need to go back and recreate an entire billing process and the permit fees and everything else that went with that, other than the fact of generating a revenue stream. It would have been it made a lot more sense to do it the other way.
As you were involved with that, did you feel like your input was wanted, was accepted? Did you feel like you were welcome into that discussion?
My input was accepted by the fire department. My input was accepted by the police department, and we had people both in the fire department and the police department that agreed with that idea. My input was not accepted at City Council. Okay. Not even slightly accepted. I did get up and speak before City Council on it, and it just wasn't accepted at all.
Okay. Greg, start with that one, and then I want to sort of branch out into the sort of larger business discussion.
Well, I serve as the chair of the 911 call center board, the Mesilla Valley Regional Dispatch Authority, and one of the things that came to us was the fact that we were having a huge number of false alarms. That ties up, of course, the 911 call people, and it also ties up our fire and emergency and police department folks, oftentimes in ways that keep them from going to calls where they're legitimately needed. And you know, as far as what exactly the best way to have set the ordinance up, we were very dependent on what we were being told by our police and fire departments. And so basically what I feel we went with was what was being recommended by those entities. And what we ended up with was a situation where we have drastically reduced the number of false alarms. So we're seeing that result. Yes, a bureaucracy of sorts. A new person was put in place at the 911 call center to basically handle that aspect of it, but it is considered well worth it from the standpoint that we're looking at much better service on the part of the 911 call center and much better response on the part of the entities which get called.
I want to branch out into sort of the larger debate that has been taking place regarding the City Council overall and its relation with the local business community. As I'm sure both of you know, the Chamber of Commerce has endorsed in every single race, and they have chosen not to endorse any of the incumbents. So they are clearly making a statement from their perspective. They feel like the City Council and city government has not been conducive enough to keep existing businesses and to lure new businesses here. Greg, start with you on that one. What is your response to just that general complaint?
Well, one note that I need to make is that the Las Cruces, both the City Council and the administrative staff used to have memberships in the Greater Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce. We had those going up to this year because we felt that that was an appropriate way to work together and make sure we were doing the best for our city and for our businesses. When they announced that they were going to start trying to put people on the council, that became a conflict of interest. And I very quickly said, we can no longer be a member of that organization. Some other people were not picking up on that, but that was one of the things that I said, regardless of whether I agree with their other statements or their other things that they were trying to do, that was one thing I knew we could no longer do. Our membership went through the end of July, I believe, or the end of June. I think it was the end of June. And so basically that was when it ended, and we have not picked it up again. If they go back to a point of where they're not endorsing and promoting candidates, then we'll be happy to, probably, I would assume, be happy to be members again. But we look forward to working with them. We continue to work with them on things like Las Cruces Days in Santa Fe and other efforts, and it's certainly something that I feel is appropriate for us to do. As far as being business friendly, I think that is a term that has been used, or unfriendly, has been used a lot when people disagree with things that the City Council has done. And some of those things may be considered that, but other times I believe it's simply been a case of, we disagree with you, so we're going to call you not business friendly. What I have seen is an effort in our permitting office to make things go more smoothly, where originally or in the past people could come in, they'd turn in a set of plans and they would get red lines on some things, and they'd come back, well, they might go to a new person, and the new person would say, well, we didn't find this last time and now we found it. So one of the changes that was made was that it would go back to the same person, so there would be no excuse for saying I didn't see it before and now I'm finding it. And trying to streamline that, also have a liaison person, an advocate, helping people walk through. So that's one of the things. We also changed the way the permitting office is physically set up so that it could be more interactive, plans could be laid out, more work could be done there in a more convivial, less adversarial and across the wire kind of way. Those are some of the things, but I have consistently made the message clear in my conversations with our city administration that we do need to be more business friendly, that we do need to reduce those times that it takes to get those things coming through when it's appropriate. There are certainly times when it's going to take time because we want to do it right. We want to do it right for this community. But I do think that we have perhaps not done everything we can yet, but we've been working on that and moving forward. So I think it is an improved situation.
Okay, Mr. VanVeen, from your perspective as a business owner, what have your experiences been, and what is your take just in general on has the city been as conducive as it could be to help local businesses?
Okay, well, I will say this, that the changes he's talking about have been made, and they are helping. It's one of those things that we as business owners have been fighting this for the last 8 years. These changes have been made in the last few months. On the majority of these changes that went on, and my question, one question is, why did it take so long to get these changes made, and why did it take a group like the Chamber of Commerce to get to the point that they are now endorsing candidates to run because of the frustration in the business world? And it's not just in business. As I'm going out door knocking, door to door, I find probably 75–80% of the people out there are frustrated. They are frustrated with dealing with our city, and it's not just on a business front, and it's everything. And I can tell you from my personal experiences, I happen to have another business that I had to go through, and hence my slogan you've seen on my stuff is cut the red tape. It has to do with things like this. We own a tower network that expands from West El Paso to Bernalillo. It takes in Deming and Alamogordo. It's actually the largest independent alarm communication network in the United States, with all the gross receipts revenue from alarm companies all over the state coming through Las Cruces. Las Cruces is the only city we had to fight with in order to get a tower put up here within the city limits, and it's only 30 feet tall, and it's on commercial property that I own. This is the type of stuff where and I don't want to point the finger at Mr. Smith. I'm pointing the finger at the city council as a whole. And it is an anti-business environment, and it has been. And it has improved a little bit, but it hasn't improved enough. We need to concentrate on some new areas and focus on getting our community back to being business friendly and at the same time people friendly. To encourage that again. The frustration out there knocking on door to door is one of the main reasons I'm running for office, is that frustration that I've felt trying to work with my own city and get things accomplished. It's very, very frustrating. And it's frustrating for everybody, and we need to fix that. That's what we need to fix. That's what we need to concentrate on.
I'm curious, because I'm not familiar with the tower incident. What was the main pushback that you were receiving from staff or from someone that made that difficult?
Well, there were a few of them on the tower thing. The first one was the fact that behind my commercial property is a residential, and they said, well, if there's a residential back there, the residential has to sign off on it, which he gladly did. As it turns out, there's actually a small plot of land through there that used to be a community ditch that belongs to the city, so I'm not even backed up to residential. I'm backed up to city-owned property. I've got commercial on one side, I've got a street on the other side, I'm on a corner. Behind me is city property. That was one of them. Then came the process of putting in the footing. We put in, we had to put in a 3 foot by 3 foot for this tower because we didn't want to have guy wires on it. We wanted it to be self-standing. It's an aluminum tower, and it's very nice. It's designed for this purpose. So instead of digging a 3 foot by 3 foot, we dug 4 foot by 4 foot and overbuilt. Okay. And that was one of the problems. Well, you overbuilt this. It's bigger than it's supposed to be, so we're going to have to tear it back out and start over. And I had to fight with them on that, and we won that argument. And then we got it all put up, and they come out and they say, well, it needs an engineering stamp. And I said, well, it's got one right there on the tower. It was already it's a component that's purchased and built for this, exactly what we're doing. Well, that's not good enough. We need a local engineer stamp on it. So then I had to hire a local engineer to come out and say, why am I putting a stamp on this? There's already one on here. And I said, because the city's requiring it. So I had to pay him $500 to stick a sticker on there to say, yeah, it's an engineering stamp. And these are the issues, and that's one. I can probably sit here and cite that I know of 70 issues with not only businesses but residents dealing with our city government on similar matters. And I think it's kind of a trickle-down mentality of And I don't think it's done on purpose, but I think it's there. Let's see how difficult we can make this to get through this. And it's turned into a big bureaucracy rather than remembering our city councils there. One of their primary jobs to do is to serve the people. They're supposed to represent the people to our government. They're not supposed to necessarily be our government, but that representation of the people to that government. And I think that that's largely forgot in City Hall right now, that is their primary job, and they should be going, what can we do to serve you? What can we do to help? Oh, you've got a problem in your neighborhood. Let me come see what that problem is. Let's deal with this on a personal level first. And then we can bring it into the bureaucracy if we need to and deal with it there. But let's get it first on the personal level and move from there.
Thank you. Appreciate the background.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just to take a little bit of a turn here, I think that business has been a big part of the complaints against the city council. But one other thing that I'd like to get your input on is the quality of life issues here in Las Cruces. I think that's another thing that we hear from a lot of folks, like how is the city addressing quality of life, parks, the downtown plaza, good or bad? Some people agree, some people don't. But what are the things that you are hearing, things that you are important to you as a candidate for Las Cruces, Mr. VanVeen? What kind of quality of life issues would you like to tackle here in Las Cruces?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is that I commend Mr. Smith on the downtown plaza and the work he's done. And I think it's a great thing for our community. And our parks, we have some pretty decent parks in our area. I think that there's some improvement that could be done on the parks. I know of one park in the area that the residents have been trying for years to get a park bench and haven't been able to. It's a small park, but they should have a bench. But besides that, I think we need to do some things to bring in some more entertainment factors into the area for the children. And the downtown plaza is going to help with that. And the downtown in general will help with that. Our population we have 40% that work and 60% that don't. And it's not because we have 60% of people unemployed. We have a lot of retirees here. So our demographic is a little different than a lot of other cities. And we need to make sure that we play into that factor, that 40% that work and they're the ones, mostly the ones raising families and that sort of stuff, that we have enough things for them and their children to do to be appealing in the area. At the same time, that 60%, we need to make sure that we provide the right amount of services for them so that they're serviced in our community as well. And I think it is kind of a balancing act to get that with the odd demographic that we have here, to get that worked out well. I would like to see that demographic improve a little bit on the 40% and go up in our working class, with some new jobs and some not necessarily even new businesses, but more business in the Las Cruces area, and balance that out a little bit more. But I'm all in favor of supporting our parks and supporting activities. We're a pretty large city, and we don't have things like a miniature golf course, and we don't have things like a go-kart track, and we don't have a lot of things like that you see in cities much smaller than ours very successfully. But we're missing all of that in Las Cruces for whatever reason. And I don't know that I can blame that one on City Council. I just think that's business. That's people not seeing that opportunity and taking that opportunity. But those are things that I think would actually improve our city and make things a little bit better for people to have things to do.
Sure. And Greg, what are your priorities? You've been pretty vocal about the swimming pool, but is that going to be one of your big focuses? And is there other things that you'd like to see improving on the quality of life issues?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sylvia. And that certainly is one of them, but I, in all fairness to my opponent, I will tell you that I could spend the rest of the day talking about quality of life issues, and we could just sit here and talk about them. But the reality is there are some very focused things that I think we need to be doing, and they center on the fact that we need to be attractive not only to the people who want to come here, but also to the people who are already living here. We have a lot of young people who move away. We have a lot of people who go, I'm not sure why I stay. But there are a lot of really good things about Las Cruces, which of course bring the retirees here and bring people here and make people stay. But I would say that I'm looking at the library. I'm looking at, okay, we've got this library, and I hear incredible things about what it accomplishes in the building that it's in, but what about another library at the East Mesa where the public safety campus is going to go? Why aren't we doing, and we should be, and that's one of the things I'll be pushing for. So that works for me on multiple levels. We're addressing curiosity in people of any age, the lifelong learners, but also helping impact the educational situation, because that's one of the things that we hear about a lot. People want to know what we can do about education. Of course, the city is a separate entity from the public schools, but we work together. We have meetings together. And what we're doing as far as exercise, what we're doing as far as museums, what we're doing as far as libraries, after-school care, summer care, those are also quality of life things, because people are very centered on their children, want to make sure their children are getting the best opportunities. And when we look at things like our museums, I was at the ribbon cutting for the signs out at the Prehistoric Trackways National Monument on Saturday. I was very involved in getting that going and worked with Jerry McDonald and Senator Bingman and others to make sure that we got that national monument there for this amazing treasure that we have. But we also have the fact that our Museum of Nature and Science functions as the visitor center for that. That's a very unique relationship between BLM and that museum and our museum system. And in that relationship, our museum system is part of the Smithsonian system. It has that connection. So there's some exciting things happening there. And I'm looking at what are we going to be doing to boost the availability of what the museums can do, what our libraries can do, what the aquatic center can do, what another gymnasium can do, what we can do so that the activities for our young people, for the people who want to come here and they want to have their business here, and they're saying, what are my employees going to do? Not all of them hike, or not all of them like to go out into the mountains. So there are other things that we do need to be doing, and the spectrum is really quite broad. But yes, absolutely, the Aquatic Center is one of those pieces, but by no means the only one.
Can I also jump into one area it's in the southern part of the city, and that's your relationship with New Mexico State. They just recently said that they're going to be zoning some new land for commercial and for housing. And I just wanted to get your thoughts sort of on the university's efforts to redevelop a lot of their land out in your part, because it's going to change the nature of that neighborhood, I would imagine, as they do this, because they have sort of mentioned that they're going to be doing a lot more developing of the land that New Mexico State owns. So do you have any thoughts on how that might play out and whether you're for that? I mean, they're also going to be, I think, building a hotel right there in that part of the city. So,
well, if I may, I by virtue of being the counselor for District 2, I get to be on 3 different committees or boards: the Town and Gown Commission, working with President Carruthers, the Campus Planning Committee, working on what happens on campus, but that oftentimes has that interface across the lines with the community. And then the University Citizens Design Review Board for the areas next to the university. And in all of those instances, there's a lot of interaction. Certainly what the university is planning on doing with the hotel next to the convention center is very exciting. Part of this Hold Harmless GRT increase that we have, and I'm sure we'll talk about that shortly,
yeah,
but
don't worry.
part of that is going to be directed towards expanding the convention center. It's one of those things, you put in a convention center, and I wasn't part of the decision to put it in the first place, but once you do that, there's always that catch-up game of how do we catch up to the level of where the conventions are coming in. And there are 2 pieces. One, we don't have enough breakout rooms currently, and we don't have a hotel adjacent. So the university is taking on the hotel aspect of that, and that's a very important piece. When President Martin was here, that was something he definitely wanted to do. During the interim, that was something that was sort of let go, and now President Carruthers wants to see that happen again. And so that's moving forward, and the additional expansion of the convention center. So that should make it able to handle larger conventions, and with that additional piece then mean more rooms in other hotels, because that one hotel next to the convention center is not going to be able to handle the expanded number of people coming to the convention. So that's an exciting piece for us there. As far as housing on the campus, that's always a mix of things. Sometimes people don't want to be next to college students. Sometimes people really want to welcome them into their neighborhood. And I do think that the the degree to which NMSU contributes to this community is huge. From the cultural things, the learning opportunities, the various aspects of this campus, which is oftentimes commented on as being one of those beautiful campuses. People go, I don't know what I'm going to study yet, but I want to be there. So that's an aspect when campus or universities are trying so hard to get enrollment up, and certainly this university has suffered with that question as well. I believe what the campus actually looks like, what the experience is like for students here, is an important piece of that. So how the housing is handled, and I think part of what you're talking about, Sylvia, is where the houses that were built in like the 1950s, the cinder block houses, you know, I think it's going to cost like $10,000 to tear each one of those down. They were built to last, but they're not very comfortable for people to live in. Did you live in one, Walt?
I did not, but we're aware of the stories of the mold and the issues.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that's been talked about, and I do think that the university is trying to do its due diligence as far as how that works, and looking at what the city's trying to do with walkable communities and mixed use and that sort of thing. And certainly areas around the university have that opportunity to interact in that way.
Yeah, and I think they're going to be expanding their like they're just developing land, and that's sort of why I was saying, because these are properties that are butting up against city. I mean, officially they're New Mexico state land, but they will change the nature of the neighborhoods all around them. So, do you have any thoughts on New Mexico State's?
Well, the first thing is just to make sure that your audience understands. You guys already know this, but you know, New Mexico State is its own government. It's separate from the city, so New Mexico State does not fall in District 2. District 2 surrounds it.
Yeah.
So we go all the way around it, and it is very important to have those two, especially District 2 and NMSU having a good relationship, but the city as a whole and NMSU needs to have a good relationship. Part of the development that I know that they've talked about is over where the Dairy Queen used to be.
Yes, exactly.
Off of Trevice right there. And that's one area that they're talking about developing. And to me, that is a prime area of looking at things the way we should be doing it, and that's infill within our city. You know, we keep working on programs to expand, and right now we have a lot of people who are building things in the county to avoid having to deal with the red tape of building within the city. And that's starting to turn around, and we need to continue turning that around and get it back to where it's more desirable to build within the city and not use up our farmland that we have for new development. Let's put the new development in the city. So I would say from that aspect, I certainly support NMSU on what they're doing. I have not seen any specific plans, nor do I know that they've even gotten to that point that they have specific plans on what they want to build there. But I do know that that land belongs to them, and they are looking at developing it in the future, and that land does fall within the purview of this district. That's outside of the boundaries of NMSU and actually within District 2, within the city. So I would say that for the short answer, I would support, unless they did something really crazy with what they want to develop there, I would support what they're doing.
The tax hike, you mentioned it briefly, Greg, and it was something that we wanted to discuss. And just to frame this for people watching, in 2003, I believe, when the state repealed the gross receipts tax on food and medical services, in order to compensate municipal governments and county governments, they passed what they called a hold harmless payment, where they sent reimbursements to these local governments to make up for that lost revenue when the food tax was cut. Fast forward to 2013, as part of a large comprehensive tax bill dealing mostly with business and corporations taxes, in order to sort of recoup or to make up some of that money, the state is phasing out those hold harmless payments. And they agreed to allow municipal governments to increase taxes up to 0.3% as part of that. So that's just the setup. Greg, I'll go ahead and start with you on this one, because you did have a vote on this issue. As an editorial board, we understood why down the road the city would need to recoup those monies, but we were concerned that you acted 3 years before the phase-in even started. And it was a 3-year grace period and then a 15-year phase-in. Why did you feel the need to move that quickly? And are you satisfied with what the City Council has decided to do in terms of bonding that money and the priorities that they've set for that money?
Well, first let me say that I was at the Roundhouse. I was at the state capitol when that vote was taken. It was a crazy thing to watch. And frankly, my mother-in-law is a state senator, and so the family connection there. But nonetheless, I watched the House of Representatives take that vote. And it was an amazing thing. They basically really did not, most of the members didn't have a really strong sense of what they were voting on. But John Arthur Smith has been saying for a long time, he's been bringing up these bills, we need to do something about the hold harmless, and this time it moved through. Frankly, I think it surprised a lot of people. But I watched that, and my sense of it was, we have to, one, as much as possible, make ourselves as immune as possible, make ourselves able to function without, because we are a home rule city, make ourselves be able to function as independently as possible from the decisions. I mean, obviously the state legislature makes rules that we have to live with, but when something like that happens, you have to question, okay, what else is going to come down the pike and is going to hit us in a way that's going to make it hard for us to deal with what we have to do as a community. So I looked at that and said, we've got to take this and address it as quickly as we can. I didn't say we had to vote for it and pass it as quickly as possible, but we had to look at it. And so I was the one, when I came back from that, I was saying, we need to get on this. And the time frame, I believe, was 2 years, because it's 2015 now. They've already started phasing it out, and it was passed in 2013. And we passed it a year later than we could have, frankly. Well, or we had initiated it a year later than we could have. But
Well, wasn't that because of concerns from the state? I mean, the city wanted it to go into effect 6 months before it actually did.
Right, no, and I was one of the people pressing for us to make that decision as soon as possible, and I'll tell you why. One, because if we're going to be able to do this sort of thing, we need to be able to function with it and know that it's there. And two, as that hold harmless is phased out, Las Cruces was one of about 6 cities that were actually not going to be able to catch up. I mean, we catch up briefly and we have a bump. I refer to it as a bump. We've got an early bump, but as time goes on and that bump gets less and less, and where we would have been, where we can anticipate or think we can anticipate where we would have been, we start losing out on that, and eventually we get to a point of where we're going, okay, what we would have had and the expenses that we do have, because we do have the large retirement community, where that is not the same as where we're able to be now. So I was pressing hard from early on, let's get a hold of it and invest it as wisely as we can in ways that we know we're either going to have to spend it eventually or otherwise use it so that we can make it be an advantage for us. And so that's why it's divided into 3 pieces. I wasn't happy about the fact that we didn't have specifics, but overall we were dividing it into 3 directions that we were going to put it. And I had to roll with that, because basically we had to make a decision, we had to move forward, and with that then we're coming back and as I said, I think it's a little late, but we are doing the due diligence as far as how we split it or how we use it in those different areas. But we had infrastructure, roads, sewers, things like that. We had facilities, buildings, not to build new buildings like the Aquatic Center, but actually to keep up the buildings that we have and to make sure that they're functioning properly, because we have water leaks, we have things that fall down and that sort of stuff, and it costs more to repair it after it's fallen down than to take care of it before it falls down. And then the economic development piece. What are we doing to bring in that GRT and those job opportunities that are going to make us able to attain that quality of life, maintain it, and do the things we as a city want to be doing. We hear from people all over the place, we want to be doing those things, but the city can't help in its piece of the pie or its piece of the obligation without the GRT piece. And that's where then having the workforce gainfully employed, the jobs and the sales and those opportunities there, boosting the GRT to a point of where we're able to do something with it, as opposed to struggling to find a way to keep it operational. So that's why I pushed for that early, and why, even though yes, we ended up with a bump early, we're not going to, if we just maintained it, we would not be able to keep up with where we would have been. But if we're able to invest it wisely, then we can get ahead of it. And I don't mind being ahead of it. And I don't mind cutting it back if we're at a point of where we're saying, you know what, we've accomplished what we needed to. We don't need to keep that tax in there. And we discussed that, whether we could take away 1/8 or 2/8, and we all agreed that we would be more than happy if we got to a point, I know all politicians say this, but we would be more than happy to get to that point and say, this is doing what we need it to. We can cut it back. So that's part of it.
Well, I would like to say first and foremost on that we need to remember as a city that city government is not a for-profit business. And things should not be looked at as from a profit standpoint. So let's jump back real quick to 2003 when this went into effect. When it was done in the first place and the hold harmless was set up, it was set up as a temporary fund. Cities and community governments, counties, were told to, at that time it was a temporary thing, and they needed to find a different means of doing this. We are one of only seven communities in the state of New Mexico that bumped this GRT up. Everybody else planned ahead. We did not plan ahead. And that puts us behind the 8 ball to start with on the whole GRT thing. The other thing that I really have an issue with on the GRT and the way that this went down is the simple fact that it is a stepped progression. It wasn't made clear to the public when that happened. Our city didn't go out there and say, look, this is a step progression, here's what's going on. They said the state's taking this money away and we need to replace it with this other money, and they did it right away, and they did it without people having an opportunity to weigh in on this at all. The thing that a lot of people miss is that not only did that tax go up in the city of Las Cruces, but then Doña Ana County did the same thing and raised the tax to the same amount. So in essence, right now, we're kind of paying that tax 3 times. We're paying it to the city, we're paying it to the county, and we're still paying it to the state because it's still coming out and will for the next 15 years, at least portions of it, as that steps down. I would be more inclined to say what we should have done as a city is said, as this tax comes down from the state, we're going to have to tax city-wise. Personally, I think the city should have planned way ahead, but it's too late for that now. So let's at least keep that an equal playing field where we're bringing in the same amount that we're sending out, and we're not trying to go, well, how do we get ahead on the money in the long run, because that's not the city's job to do. That's not our job to figure out a way, how do we make a profit off of this? That's a business job. You own a business, you try to figure out a way to make a profit off of something. But as a city, I completely disagree with that philosophy that we try to make a profit off of this GRT and stretch it out that far. The other bad part about this is they almost immediately, sat down and started bonding this thing out. So now we've borrowed against this money, and a new city council gets in, is not going to have the opportunity to reverse it. It's too late to reverse it, and it's not one of those things. And all day long you can talk about, well, if this worked out good, we reverse a little bit of it over here. But if it's bonded out, it's bonded out. That money is already spent and accounted for. And it's just not available for us to do. So,
and just real quickly, what impact on both the citizens and the businesses that work here do you think that tax increase has had?
I think it has a huge impact. You look at small things. Somebody was saying, well, I bought a meal recently and it didn't go up that much on one meal. But when you start looking at the bigger picture and the bigger ticket items, and I'll give you an example between our tax rate and tax rates in other locations. I don't care if you want to pick on Alamogordo or El Paso or where you want to pick on, where the tax rate is lower than ours because we're now matched with Santa Fe. If you go to buy a vehicle, a car, in one of those other places, you're going to find that car is going to be cheaper there. Okay, so what happens is you may go to the store still or to the restaurant and buy a local meal here, and you do your grocery shopping here and that sort of stuff. But when it comes to big ticket items, people are going to start looking outside to avoid paying those higher taxes. And when they do that, the city of Las Cruces loses gross receipts revenue off of that. And then what's going to happen? We're going to turn around in 5 years from now or 10 years from now saying, well, we have a depletion in gross receipts revenue, so we need to raise the taxes. And then we raise the taxes again, and it becomes this giant snowball effect. And we have to be really, really careful with this, because when we get our city backwards like this, when we get our taxes, one of our poorer communities in the state of New Mexico matched on taxes with one of our richest communities, and happens to be one of those communities that also has a huge tourist base, which we don't have, we're in trouble. We got ourselves into a real fix here, and I really think that this is going to be a hard one to come out of. It's not attractive to businesses who want to move into our area to look at it and say, oh, well, they've got such a high tax rate. Why would they come here when they can go to Albuquerque and get a lower tax rate than Las Cruces to set up shop in? It's hard on local businesses because we're having to charge more taxes. For businesses like mine that do business in other communities and that revenue comes through our community here, we're charging a higher tax base to somebody outside of the area that lives in the county, for instance, because our business is based out of Las Cruces. It becomes a real burden on the business community and on the people who live and shop and work here. And I think you'll find, and you can probably already find, that a lot of people go out of town and start doing their big ticket items out of town instead of buying here. And in the long run, it is going to hurt us because it cuts back on the gross receipts tax that's brought into our community. A lower tax base is going to actually help the city more than a higher tax base because we have more shopping done locally. We used to be a city that people would come to Alamogordo to Las Cruces to buy a car all the time. They would come here to our dealerships and buy a car, and that money would go into our gross receipts tax. Now you'll find just the opposite. People are driving down to Alamogordo and buying cars instead of buying here, and all of that gross receipts tax goes into Alamogordo instead of into Las Cruces.
Greg, any of that you want to respond to, and particularly the part about, with better planning, this could have been avoided?
Well, planning is one of those things where oftentimes it's easy to fault the people who go before you and say they should have done something differently. I oftentimes come into the situation and say, this is what we've got, this is what we've got to deal with. So when I was elected in 2011, I was looking at a situation where the hold harmless was already in place, and it was being treated at that point, and I have been assuming that it was being treated as a permanent promise, and so that was the assumption that was being made, although John Arthur Smith, Senator Smith, mostly from the west side of Las Cruces and Deming, had been saying for a long time it can't be sustained that way. Our severance tax on our oil and gas can't keep supporting this the way it's going. So the message was out there. From the standpoint of how we then curtail spending or make it more effective is an ongoing argument, because everybody has a pet project, everybody has a pet direction that they feel like money needs to go. Well, you can cut that out, but you can't cut that out. The next person says, well, you can cut that out, but you can't cut this out. And so it's a really very difficult to say that, okay, we're going to make these cuts and do all of that to make the money match. But I also want to point out that the city of Las Cruces has a case. We joined in with Española and originally the county, Santa Fe County, about where the county applied within city limits the extra 3/8, because typically in the past the assumption has been, the rule has been, that you couldn't do that. You couldn't apply a county tax within the city limits unless county was actually providing cities or services within the city. So at that point we were looking at, okay, the assumption was that the county wouldn't be able to apply that tax within the city limits. The county went ahead and applied it within the city limits, and so that case is now going to be heard on next Monday, I believe, the 2nd. So we should have at least a beginning of a response on that at that point, and that may change whether or not we have that 3/8 coming out for the county. But certainly, the county wants to use it for what the county wants to use it for, but that doesn't mostly pertain to things within the city limits. We felt that that was unfortunate. The county was in a very different situation as far as what it was not going to be able to pay for with the hold harmless removed. It was a very different situation from what the city was. So we kind of differ with the county on that application.
Can I ask one quick follow-up to this? We have about 10 minutes left, and I know you want to talk about minimum wage and a few other things, but Greg pointed out the 3 broad areas that the city wants to use this incremental money for. And for the record, the Sun News was opposed to this GRT increase, and we said so as an editorial board, but it's done. And the money is now called a bump. That bump is happening, and there are 3 areas that have been identified where that money will be focused. Can you talk briefly about that decision to identify those 3 areas, and do you think that was the right decision, and how would you look at it as a council member?
I will start by saying that, as far as I'm concerned, the whole thing should be rolled back and it should be done incrementally, but it's too late to do that. So I understand that, but given the circumstances that we're in now, I think that the 3 areas that they're looking at spending the money in is actually worthwhile areas to spend the money in. So I would agree on that aspect of it, that those are areas that will help in ways. It's not going to change that long-term picture and that long-term problem that this has created. And that's my biggest concern with it, is spending that money in any area that down the line is actually going to come back to hurt us because of the fact that our gross receipts tax is now as high as it is, and is not subject to be changed or rolled back. I firmly believe that taxation is one of those things that we need to be very careful with, and if we're going to tax, we need to make sure it's the right thing to do before we jump in with both feet and do it. And I don't believe that this was the right thing to do. I was against it from the very beginning, and probably always will be. That you don't take a tax like this and just go, well, eventually we're going to lose this money, so let's just raise it now, and charge it ahead of the time. I just don't agree. But yes, as far as the areas they're looking at spending it in, I'm okay with that.
As an editorial board, we agreed with those three broad areas as well. Yes. And so we think, again, it's here, it's happening, and if we can stay in that range or in those areas, we think that's a good thing. Yep. I know you want to talk about it.
I did want to touch on the minimum wage issue because it was so controversial and drew so much attention to City Council. And I'll just start with a basic philosophical question. Philip, I'll start with you.
Okay.
Does the city have any business dealing with minimum wage at all, do you think, or should that be a state or a federal issue?
As far as I'm concerned, that should either be a state or federal issue. I don't really think that the city really has any business dealing with minimum wage. We've got it now. We've already opened that can. So we can't put everything back in, and we have to deal with what we've got. But yeah, I think that really should have been tackled on a state or a federal level rather than a citywide level, for the same reason as the gross receipts tax. It artificially inflates things here and not to the cities around us.
Okay, Greg, same question.
Well, I looked at this, and you all recently pointed out that Las Cruces is currently the 294th largest city in the United States. And out of all of those cities, only about 20 have actually imposed their own minimum wage. And most of those cities are larger than Las Cruces, a couple of them, Santa Fe notably, and two on the West Coast, Emeryville in California between Berkeley and Oakland, and SeaTac, which is where the airport is for Seattle and Tacoma, are the smaller ones. And so it's an unusual, very unusual thing for a city to actually impose its own minimum wage. My perspective on that was, and we started talking about this about 2 years ago, Councilor Pedrosa was bringing it up at council meetings, and at that point what had been attempted to be established at the state level was an $8.50 minimum wage. And so I said, well, if we're going to be talking about this, then let's do it in a reasonable fashion. Let's focus on what is appropriate for Las Cruces. How do we, if we're going to talk about a minimum wage, a municipal minimum wage, something very unusual and something very few cities our size do, then let's make sure it's appropriate for Las Cruces. And that was my focus throughout the whole discussion about it, was what is going to work for Las Cruces, what's appropriate for us.
And just very quickly, there was a lot of concern that the city council sort of got creative with the initiative process. Most people thought that there were two options, that you could either put it to a vote or you could accept it. The city attorney found a third option where you accept it and then make whatever changes you want to it. Is that keeping with the spirit, you believe, of the initiative process? And if not, does that process need to be changed or altered?
Well, let me point out to you, because a lot of people have wanted to tell us what we should have done or how we should have done it. And I've always appreciated the fact that some people have read our charter. And what the charter says is the qualified resident voters of the city shall have the power to propose ordinances to the council. If the council fails to adopt an ordinance so proposed without any change in substance, the voters shall adopt or reject it at a city election. It's often been presented that somehow this was supposed to go to the voters and that we somehow took it away from the voters. And the reality is that the whole purpose of this initiative process in our charter is to make sure that if the council is ignoring something or needs to address something, the public has the right and the ability to bring it to the council. And that is what is done. The second piece of that is that the council should always have the right as a representative of the people of this community, always have the right to look at something and say, you know what, we do this constantly with ordinances that come before us. We can amend them. And
well, that was our point, Greg, is that, you know, if it had it gone to the vote and had it passed, the city council never gave up the opportunity to go back and revise it if there was a majority of councilors that wanted to revise it. Our issue all along was that with all the work that went into it, and that may be the charter, I trust you're reading it accurately, but that certainly wasn't the intent, and that wasn't the conversation in the community when Cafe was trying to get those signatures, and when the clerks certified those, there was an expectation that would go to the voters and never would have stopped the city council from being able to amend it.
But that is how they presented it to the people who were signing the petition. If they had presented it from the standpoint of this is an initiative and this is how it's set up in the charter, then it might have been a different expectation. The problem that I have with it is that the initiative is set up this way in the charter. You go out and you say, I want to give you something different, I want to tell you something different. Well, then how do we deal with that if you're saying something different from what the charter makes available?
Thoughts on this? I mean, I want to give you an opportunity. We only have a few minutes left.
Okay. Well, first of all, the petition that went around, it was very clear that the thing that was being suggested there is that it go to a vote. That's what the people wanted. Now, I've been very vocal about the fact that for the most part, I oppose the minimum wage. I don't oppose higher wages, but I oppose this minimum wage thing. But I'm also a very firm believer in following what the voting public tells us to do. We're there to represent their voice. I firmly believe that this should have gone before a vote, and the people of Las Cruces should have voted on it. I also feel that it would have got voted down. That's just my own personal feeling on that. But I really believe that this thing should have gone before a vote. And the people of Las Cruces should have had the opportunity to vote on this issue. There's 6,000 signatures there requesting a vote. Let's put it before a vote. You know, at this point, let's listen to a very large group of people and say, you know what, they want to put this before a vote to the people. Let's make that happen. And I know that the subject came up, well, it's going to be very expensive to do a special election for that. Well, it could have been postponed. We will put it for a vote. The next time we have an election, we'll put this on the ballot. We'll add it in on the ballot and we'll do a vote on it at that point. You know, do something along those lines with it and actually get it to where it's voted on by the people in that decision. Even though I'm opposed to it, if I was sitting on city council today and this thing went before a vote and the people said yes, then the answer is yes, I'm going to back that up, even though I disagree with it, because that's the job, that's what you do. So that's where I'm at on that.
We appreciate that, and we have come to the end of our hour. We want to thank both Greg Smith and Philip VanVeen. Once again, they are the two candidates for the City Council race in District 2. This was the third of these that we've done with KRWG, and we thank them for their partnership in this, and we remind everybody once again that the election is this Tuesday. Get out and vote.